In the cold, isolated town of Eldridge, nestled between craggy peaks and shrouded in an eternal mist that seemed as old as time itself, a foreboding sense of dread had begun to permeate the air. The residents, a hardy and withdrawn sort, spoke little but listened much, especially at night when the wind carried whispers that were not quite sounds yet more than mere silence. It was during the dying days of autumn when first the anomalies began. The waters of Lake Moira, which had laid placid and serene for generations, started to churn without wind or tide. The thick fog that rolled in nightly grew denser, clinging with unnatural persistence through the rays of the morning sun. And then there were the disappearances, first just woodland creatures, but soon, people too began to vanish without trace or reason. Professor Alton Emeridge, a scholar of ancient lore and forgotten histories, had come to Eldridge upon hearing of its peculiarities. With a thin frame cloaked in a worn tweed suit, and carrying a satchel filled with tomes and manuscripts, he appeared, to the townspeople, as another curious outsider soon to be swallowed by the town's secrets. But Emeridge was no ordinary visitor. He was a seeker of truths best left unspoken, a hunter on the trail of beings that dwelled in the shadowy corners of fear itself. His investigations led him to the local library, a quaint building of stone and timber, smelling of old books and mildew. The librarian, a gaunt woman named Mrs. Pritchard, watched him with wary eyes as he pored over the ancient texts. "You're looking for the stories, aren't you? The old tales?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Yes," Emeridge replied without looking up. "I believe what is happening here is not mere superstition or natural anomaly. I suspect a darker force, linked to the old ones." Mrs. Pritchard shuddered visibly. "Speak not too loudly of such things," she cautioned. "This town. It listens." Undeterred, Emeridge delved deeper into the myths and legends of Eldridge. The more he read, the clearer the connections became. The old ones, as described by ancient and forbidden texts, were entities of immense power and incomprehensible motives. Beings that existed before the stars were born and would persist beyond their dying. According to legend, they had been imprisoned beneath the earth, beneath the sea, in spaces between spaces where reality was thin. One night, as Emeridge was engrossed in a particularly tattered scroll, a sudden commotion erupted outside. He rushed to the window, his heart pounding. Outside, the town square was chaos, illuminated by torches and lanterns. The townsfolk were gathered, pointing and shouting towards the lake. The lake was boiling, water roiling as if a great furnace burned beneath its surface. From the frothy depths emerged a form, vast, undulating, covered in eyes that burned like coals. The creature was colossal, a blasphemy against nature, its body an amalgamation of tentacles and mouths that whispered madness. Emeridge grasped the window sill, his mind racing. This was no myth, it was a harbinger of doom. The old ones were awakening. He knew then that the stories were a warning, one that had gone unheeded for too long. As he watched the creature from the depths make landfall, its massive form blotting out the stars with its sheer enormity, Emeridge felt a chill of utter despair. The town of Eldridge, with all its secrets and shadows, was about to face an ancient terror reborn. It was the beginning of an ordeal that would test the limits of sanity and survival. The creature's emergence was not the end but merely a herald of the horrors to come. As the townsfolk watched, transfixed by fear and awe, more disturbances rippled across Lake Moira. The water bubbled and spat as if the lakebed itself were a cauldron of ancient and malevolent forces stirring to life. Each new form that broke the surface was more grotesque than the last, an endless variety of nightmares crafted from the depths of the abyss. Professor Emeridge, though shaken to his core, knew that understanding these beings was the key to combating them. He retreated to the safety of the library, his mind racing with passages and references from the Eldridge tomes he had studied. Mrs. Pritchard, who had followed him in a panic, locked the doors behind them. "We must find a way to send them back," Emeridge declared, his voice a mix of determination and fear. "But how?" Mrs. Pritchard's hands trembled as she spoke. "We know nothing of their kind, except that they should not exist." Emeridge's eyes were dark with resolve. "The books, the legends may hold a clue. We must look deeper." Together, they scoured the ancient texts, piecing fragments of rituals and forgotten lore that spoke of the old ones and their banishment. According to a cryptic prophecy in a tome bound in shadowy leather, the return of the Old Ones could be forestalled by a convergence of light and darkness at the threshold of reality. Meanwhile, outside, the chaos had taken root. The creatures moved through Eldridge, their massive forms casting shadows over the buildings as their tentacles tore through structures with indifferent ease. Screams echoed through the streets, cries of terror that went abruptly silent, leaving a haunting void in their wake. A group of survivors, led by the town's doctor, Dr. Harlan Graves, made their way to the library. They were a motley crew, each bearing the marks of the night's terror. Among them was young Ellie Marwood, a schoolteacher, who clutched a tattered stuffed bear, a relic from a child who was no more. "We can't stay out there," Dr. Graves panted as they barred the library doors. "Whatever those things are, they're tearing the town apart." Emeridge met his gaze, his own eyes hollow with the weight of grim understanding. "We may have a way to stop them," he explained, motioning to the scattered books around him. "But we need time." As the night deepened, so did their desperation. They worked feverishly, translating esoteric languages and connecting arcane theories, while every so often, the ground trembled beneath them, a grim reminder of the horrors outside. By the light of flickering candles, Emeridge found it, a ritual that purported to seal away the Old Ones, requiring a sacrifice of light and darkness. But the details were vague, shrouded in allegorical riddles that twisted the mind. As they debated interpretations, a sudden, soul-shredding screech pierced the night. One of the larger creatures had found them, its myriad eyes peering into the very depths of the library through shattered windows. "Now," Emeridge shouted, grabbing the ancient tome. "We may not get another chance." Gathering in a circle, the survivors joined hands, their faces etched with fear and determination. Emeridge began chanting the incantation, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Ellie, holding the bear, began to sob quietly, the sound mingling with the words of power that filled the room. Outside, the sky itself seemed to respond, swirling with unnatural clouds that flickered with strange lights. The ground shook, and the air thrummed with a power that was at once terrifying and awe-inspiring. The creature recoiled as if struck, its screams echoing into the night that no longer belonged solely to darkness. Across Eldridge, the other horrors paused, their attention drawn towards the library, towards the convergence of light and darkness that was unfolding. As the ritual reached its climax, Emeridge's voice broke the final words, a desperate cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. Light exploded around them, blinding and pure, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. When the survivors' vision cleared, they were alone. The creatures, the Old Ones, were gone, as if they had never been. The town of Eldridge lay in ruins, but it was silent, free from the whispers of the depths. As dawn broke over the ravaged town, the survivors emerged into the new light. The cost had been unimaginable, but they had saved their world. Eldridge would rebuild, its scars a testament to the night they faced the ancient darkness, and survived. The sun rose over Eldridge with a hesitant light, its rays filtering through the remnants of destruction. Buildings lay in shambles, streets were torn asunder, and the lake, the once serene Lake Moira, was now a gaping maw of darkness, as if it swallowed all hope that dared approach its shores. Professor Emeridge, weary but vigilant, walked through the town with Dr. Graves and Ellie. They assessed the damage and helped to organize the survivors into work parties. Despite the devastation, there was a palpable sense of relief among the townspeople. They had faced the unspeakable and lived. As the celebrations continued, Emeridge walked to the edge of Lake Moira, now serene and beautiful under the night sky. He looked out over the water, feeling a peace he hadn't known in decades. The battle was over, but their watch would never end. This was the legacy of Eldridge, a legacy of curiosity, courage, and a never-ending vigil against the darkness.